Los Angeles, September 1941. It's already past 10 and the sidewalk outside the screening house is slick with spilled light and cigarette ash. You can smell hot bulbs warming inside flash guns. Hear the low metallic click as photographers test shutters that have already been cocked twice too many times. Everyone is ready. They're always ready. The press line is tight tonight, tighter than usual, men shoulder to shoulder. Camera straps cutting into collars, notebooks folded, pencils clenched in teeth. No shouting yet, no jokes, just waiting, that particular stillness that only comes when people who make a living from noise are forced into patience. At the far end of the rope, Hedda Hopper stands perfectly still. Hat immaculate, gloves on, chin lifted just enough to suggest she sees everything already. She doesn't look at the photographers, she doesn't have to, they watch her instead. If Hopper raises an eyebrow, a career tilts. If she writes one word out of place, a contract renegotiates itself overnight. But even she seems paused tonight, listening. From inside the building comes the sound of doors opening, not wide, not dramatic, just enough to let warm air spill out, carrying laughter from a private screening that's already ending without fanfare. The photographers straighten. Someone mutters a name, a star, a big one. And then someone else steps out first. Not an actor. A man in a conservative suit, dark tie, no studio pin, not smiling in the way stars smile when they expect applause. This smile is small, controlled, practiced in rooms without windows. A studio lawyer. No one lowers their camera yet, a few lenses twitch upward, unsure. This is irregular. Lawyers don't walk into light, they stay beside doors, they whisper, they pull people aside. This one doesn't. He steps forward just past the velvet rope and stops exactly where the flashbulbs will hit his face if they fire. They don't. He waits. Not long, just enough. The silence tightens. Somewhere behind the line, someone clears his throat and immediately regrets it. The sound is too loud, too revealing. The lawyer nods once, a polite acknowledgement, as if greeting acquaintances at a dinner party instead of men who live by exposing faces. And then he speaks. No raised voice, no threat, no warning. Just one sentence. Measured, courteous. He mentions national security. He mentions cooperation. He doesn't say orders. He doesn't say government. He doesn't say investigation. He lets the words hang exactly where they can do the most work on their own. For half a second, no one understands. Then it lands. Not as fear. As calculation. You can see it in the photographer's hands first. Fingers relax just slightly on shutter buttons that were already half pressed. One camera lowers an inch, then another. Flashbulbs stay dark. Someone looks sideways, not at the lawyer but at Hedda Hopper. Hopper doesn't move, doesn't nod, doesn't smile, she simply doesn't intervene. That's the signal. The lawyer adds nothing else. He smiles again, smaller than before, and steps back toward the door. He hasn't blocked anyone, he hasn't asked anyone to leave, he hasn't given instructions. And yet, when the star finally emerges 30 seconds later, the press line is dead. No flashes. No questions. Just the sound of leather shoes on pavement and the murmur of a crowd pretending nothing is wrong. The photographs that would have been taken that night never exist. And everyone there knows exactly why. What just happened doesn't look like power. That's the trick. There were no police, no badges, no uniforms, no shouted commands, nothing that could be quoted later, nothing actionable, nothing you could point to and say that was the moment. But every man on that sidewalk understood the implications immediately. Because in Hollywood, access is oxygen. And federal attention doesn't arrive with handcuffs first. It arrives with questions, with phone calls that don't get returned, with studios that suddenly stop answering when your name comes up. The lawyer never said you're forbidden. He implied you're being watched. That's worse. Inside the photographers' heads, the math is already running. If I fire, what happens next? Not tonight, not tomorrow. But next month when my credential renewal sits on someone's desk. Next week when my editor asks why we've suddenly lost invitations. Next year when my name stops appearing on preferred lists. One picture isn't worth that. Even Hedda Hopper understands, perhaps better than anyone. She has built her empire not just on what she prints, but on what she doesn't, on knowing where the invisible lines are before anyone else sees them. She says nothing. Later, she will write columns about patriotism, about unity, about responsibility in dangerous times. She will never mention the lawyer. She won't have to. Behind the scenes, this isn't new. 1941 has changed Hollywood's atmosphere overnight. Studios are suddenly wrapped in flags, scripts quietly adjusted, themes reconsidered, projects paused, then resumed under new guidance. No announcements, just conversations. The lawyer you saw tonight is one of many. He doesn't work alone. He doesn't need to. The studios already understand which way the wind is blowing and they intend to stay ahead of it. Better to silence a camera than answer a committee. Better to pause a flash than explain a negative. Back on the sidewalk, the crowd begins to disperse. No arguments, no protests, just quiet embarrassment. Men coiling camera cords that were never used. Photographers glancing at one another not to confirm fear but to confirm realism. Someone mutters, "Another night." But everyone knows it wasn't just another night. Something has shifted. A line was drawn not in ink but in silence. And here's the most unsettling part. If you asked any single person there what exactly frightened them, they wouldn't be able to answer cleanly. No one threatened jail. No one said don't. The lawyer didn't even raise his voice. He relied on something far older and far more efficient. Understanding. The shared knowledge of how fast a career can evaporate in a town that remembers everything and forgives nothing. And as the last photographers drift away into the dark, the flashbulbs still unlit, a new rule settles over the sidewalk. Not enforced. Accepted. Because in Hollywood, the most dangerous power isn't violence. It's the ability to make everyone police themselves. And that night, with one sentence spoken softly under studio lights, an entire press line chose silence, without ever being ordered to. What they didn't yet understand was how far that silence would spread. The silence doesn't end on the sidewalk. It travels. By morning, it's already moved indoors, into darkrooms that stay unused. Into newsrooms where editors read copy twice and then quietly remove a paragraph without explanation. No memos circulate, no lists are posted, nothing official ever arrives. That's what makes it work. In Hollywood, pressure is most effective when it never announces itself. 2 days after the screening, a photographer who was there that night submits a routine request for access to another studio event. He's made this request dozens of times before. Same format, same contact, same timing. This time, he doesn't get a rejection. He gets nothing. No acknowledgement, no delay notice, just silence. He waits a day, then 2, then a week. When he finally reaches someone on the phone, an assistant he vaguely knows, the voice on the other end hesitates just long enough to matter. "We're reviewing credentials," she says carefully. Reviewing. That word will appear everywhere now. Around the same time, editors begin receiving quiet calls from studio public relations offices. Not demands, not warnings. Just a heads up, they say. It's a sensitive moment. Let's all be responsible. The language is soft, cooperative, patriotic. It's also unmistakably coordinated. What no one says out loud, but everyone understands, is that this cooperation flows one way. Refuse it and something will change, no threats required. Hollywood in 1941 is already operating under pressure. The war in Europe has turned suspicion into currency. Congress is watching, committees are forming, studios are anxious to appear loyal, orderly, aligned with national interest. They don't want controversy. They want control. And control, once practiced quietly, becomes addictive. At gossip desks across Los Angeles, names begin to disappear. Not erased, just delayed. A scandal that would have made page 1 last year is now pushed to page 6. A photograph is held back pending confirmation that never arrives. An item that could be printed is suddenly framed as ill-advised. The shift is subtle but relentless. Journalists begin editing themselves before anyone else can. Because here's what the lawyer understood better than most people on that sidewalk. You don't need to tell a room to be afraid. You just need to remind it what fear looks like. Hedda Hopper notices the change immediately. She always does. Her column continues, but the tone sharpens in specific places and softens in others. She writes with an eye not just for drama but alignment. She praises restraint. She criticizes irresponsible rumor-mongering. She signals carefully that some stories are no longer acceptable currency. She never mentions lawyers. She doesn't have to. When Hopper goes quiet on a topic, others follow. Not out of obedience. Out of survival instinct. Behind studio gates, attorneys and executives meet more frequently now. These are not panicked gatherings. They're strategic, calm, legal pads, coffee cups, windows closed. They discuss exposure, optics, risk. But beneath all of it is a shared understanding. Press unpredictability is a liability during wartime. And liabilities must be managed. The solution isn't censorship. That would draw attention. The solution is cooperation. Unwritten, untraceable, denied if ever questioned. For photographers, the consequences are immediate and personal. One man loses a long-standing studio pass without explanation. Another suddenly finds his pictures consistently arriving too late for print deadlines. A third hears through the grapevine that his name is complicated. Complicated. Another word that appears everywhere now. No one can challenge it, there's nothing to appeal, no accusation to defend against. Just distance. And distance in Hollywood is fatal. At night, in bars just far enough from studio lots to feel private, photographers compare notes. Quietly. You hear anything back? No. They won't say why. They don't ask about the lawyer, they don't need to. Everyone knows this started somewhere specific. One sentence. One moment. A flash that didn't fire. What makes the silence truly effective is its inconsistency. Not everyone is punished. Some photographers keep working, some reporters keep printing. The pressure isn't universal, it's selective. Which means you never know where the line actually is. And that uncertainty forces compliance better than rules ever could. People stop pushing because they don't know how far is too far. Meanwhile, studios congratulate themselves on avoiding trouble. No headlines, no investigations, no congressional letters. From their perspective, it's working. But something else is happening too. The press, once unruly and aggressive, is becoming predictable. Safer. Easier to manage. And once that happens, the temptation grows. If silence can be induced this easily, what else might cooperation accomplish? For the lawyer who spoke that night, this isn't theoretical. He sees the results within weeks. No backlash. No complaints. Just a noticeable drop in friction. The machine hums more smoothly. And so the method is quietly reused. Not always by him. Sometimes by others who watched carefully and learned. This is how power expands in America. Not through edict. Through precedent. A smile here. A suggestion there. A career slowed just enough to make a point. All technically deniable. All devastatingly effective. And here's the most unsettling consequence. By winter, many photographers can no longer remember exactly when they stopped taking certain pictures. There was no announcement, no meeting, no vote. Just a series of small choices made under invisible pressure. They didn't lose their freedom all at once. They traded pieces of it for stability. For access. For the hope that compliance today would mean survival tomorrow. The sidewalk outside that screening house returns to normal. Flashbulbs fire again. Stars pose. Laughter returns. But something fundamental has changed in the exchange. The press still gathers. But it waits now. Listens. Calculates. Because everyone learned the same lesson that night, whether they admit it or not. The most dangerous threat is the one that never raises its voice. And once a room learns how to fall silent together, it rarely forgets. What no one yet understands is where that silence will eventually lead them. By early 1942, the silence has settled so deeply into Hollywood that it no longer feels imposed. It feels natural. Press lines still form, cameras still hang from necks, columns still run. From the outside, nothing appears broken. If anything, the machine looks smoother now, polished, efficient. But inside the trade, everyone senses the absence. Stories don't break the way they used to. Photographs feel staged before they're even taken. Angles are chosen not for truth but for safety. No one talks about it directly. You can't. Because by now, the cause has blurred into background noise, like a distant hum you only notice when it stops. A reporter who once chased stars through side doors begins taking assignments out of town. A photographer drifts toward advertising work. Another disappears altogether, name no longer spoken except in half sentences. Nothing dramatic happens to them. That's the brilliance of it. They're not arrested, they're not sued, they're not blacklisted in any way that could be proven. They're just gradually unnecessary. Inside the studios, the strategy evolves. Lawyers are no longer needed at press lines, the lesson has already landed. Publicists do the work now, assistants, even stars themselves who learn to pause just long enough to let photographers wonder whether a shot is welcome. It's efficient. Self-policing spreads faster than enforcement ever could. Years later, some of the people who were there that night try to remember the exact sentence the lawyer used. They can't. That's what frightens them most. It wasn't the words. It was the understanding behind them. National security. Cooperation. Phrases vague enough to mean nothing and everything. No one ever confirmed what would have happened if a flash had fired. They didn't need to. Fear doesn't require proof. It requires plausibility. Hollywood carries that lesson forward. Into the war years. Into the post-war boom. Into the committee hearings that come later, where silence becomes survival and questions become liabilities. By the time more overt pressures appear, blacklists, loyalty oaths, whispered names, the industry is already trained. Already compliant. Already fluent in quiet destruction. Some photographers eventually admit the truth in private, decades later. They say the hardest part wasn't losing access. It was losing instinct. They stopped knowing when to push, when to hesitate. They second-guessed moments before lifting the camera, before asking a question. They learned to anticipate discomfort before it was expressed. That kind of conditioning doesn't fade. One of them describes it simply. You start doing the censor's job for him, he says, and after a while you don't remember what you used to look for. The lawyer from 1941 goes on with his career. No scandal. No exposure. No reckoning. He doesn't need one. His influence was never recorded in documents, it lived in behavior, in absence, in what no longer appeared in print. There is no dramatic end to his story. Just impact. Hedda Hopper continues to write. Her column grows more powerful than ever, more feared, more respected. She understands the shift intuitively. She has always known how power actually works in Hollywood. Not through shouting. Through access. Through silence. Through the knowledge that what isn't written can be deadlier than what is. She outlives nearly everyone involved. The sidewalk night becomes a footnote, if it's remembered at all. What remains is a pattern. A single moment where no law changed. No policy was announced. No threat was spoken aloud. And yet, an entire press culture recalibrated itself in real time. Not because it was forced. Because it understood the cost of resistance. This is the part of American history that rarely makes it on screen. Not conspiracies. Not villains. But systems quietly teaching people to restrain themselves. Teaching industries to move as one without needing coordination. Teaching silence to feel like professionalism. If you walk past that old screening house today, there's nothing to mark what happened there. No plaque. No record. No photograph. The flashbulbs didn't fire. And that absence is the only evidence left. The fear wasn't in the sentence. It was in the pause before it. In the lawyer's confidence that he wouldn't need to repeat himself. In the collective decision, made silently and instantly to comply. That's the truth this story leaves behind. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it lets you choose. And sometimes the most important moment in a room isn't what happens next. It's what never happens again.